The territory of the modern state of Iraq was defined in 1920 as Mandatory Iraq. It is centered on Lower Mesopotamia but also includes part of Upper Mesopotamia and of the Syrian Desert and the Arabian Desert. As a part of the larger Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia saw the earliest emergence of civilization in the Neolithic and formed a significant part of the ancient Near East throughout the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. After the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, Mesopotamia fell under Persian and then Greek rule. By the 3rd century, when it was once again under Persian control, the earlier population was increasingly displaced by Arabs, and the Arabic name Al-Iraq dates to about this time. The Sassanid Empire was destroyed by the Islamic conquests and displaced by the Rashidun Caliphate in the 7th century. Baghdad became the center of the Islamic Golden Age, under the Abbasid Caliphate during the 9th century. Baghdad's rapid growth stagnated in the 10th century due to the Buwayhid and Seljuk invasions, but it remained of central importance until the Mongol invasion of 1258. After this, Iraq became a province of the Turco-Mongol Ilkhanate and declined in importance. After the disintegration of the Ilkhanate, Iraq was ruled by the Jalarids and Karakoyunlu until its eventual absorption into the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, intermittently falling under Iranian Safavid and Mamluk control. Ottoman rule ended with World War I, and Iraq came to be administered by the British Empire as Mandatory Iraq until the establishment of the Kingdom of Iraq in 1933. A republic was established in 1958 following a coup d'état. It was controlled by Saddam Hussein from 1979 to 2003, into which period falls the Iran-Iraq War and the Gulf War. Saddam Hussein was deposed following the 2003 US-led invasion of the country. Over the following years, Iraq came to the brink of civil war, and the situation deteriorated after the withdrawal of US troops in 2011. By 2015, Iraq was effectively divided, the central and southern part being controlled by the government, the northwest by the Kurdistan Regional Government and the western part by the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant. Prehistory. During 1957 to 1961, Shanidar Cave was excavated by Ralph Solecki and his team from Columbia University, and 9 skeletons of Neanderthal man of varying ages and states of preservation and completeness were discovered dating from 60–80,000 years BP. A 10th individual was recently discovered by M. Zedda during examination of a faunal assemblage from the site at the Smithsonian Institution. The remains seem to Zedda to suggest that Neanderthals had funeral ceremonies, burying their dead with flowers, and that they took care of injured and elderly individuals. Mesopotamia is the site of the earliest developments of the Neolithic Revolution from around 10,000 BC. It has been identified as having inspired some of the most important developments in human history, including the invention of the wheel, the planting of the first cereal crops and the development of cursive script, mathematics, astronomy and agriculture. Ancient Mesopotamia. Bronze Age Sumer emerged as the civilization of Lower Mesopotamia out of the prehistoric Ubaid period in the early Bronze Age. Classical Sumer ends with the rise of the Akkadian Empire in the 24th century BC. Following the Gutian period, there is a brief Sumerian renaissance in the 21st century, cut short in the 20th century BC by Amorite invasion. The Amorite dynasty of Ising persisted until c. 1600 BC, when southern Mesopotamia was united under Kassite Babylonian rule. The north of Mesopotamia had become the Akkadian-speaking state of Assyria by the late 25th century BC. Along with the rest of Mesopotamia, it was ruled by Akkadian kings from the late 24th to mid-22nd centuries BC, after which it once again became independent. Babylonia was a state Lower Mesopotamia with Babylon as its capital. It was founded as an independent state by an Amorite king named Sumubum in 1894 BC. During the 3rd millennium BCE, there developed a very intimate cultural symbiosis between the Sumerians and the Akkadians, which included widespread bilingualism. Akkadian gradually replaced Sumerian as the spoken language of Mesopotamia, somewhere around the turn of the 3rd and the 2nd millennium BC. But Sumerian continued to be used as a written or ceremonial language in Mesopotamia well into the period of classical antiquity. Babylonia emerged from the Amorite dynasties when Hammurabi unified the territories of the former kingdoms of Sumer and Akkad. During the early centuries of what is called the Amorite period, the most powerful city-states were Ising and Larsa, although Shamshi-Adad I came close to uniting the more northern regions around Ashur and Mari. One of these Amorite dynasties was established in the city-state of Babylon, which would ultimately take over the others and form the First Babylonian Empire, during what is also called the Old Babylonian period. Assyria was an Akkadian kingdom in Upper Mesopotamia, that came to rule regional empires a number of times through history. It was named for its original capital, the ancient city of Ashur. Of the early history of the Kingdom of Assyria, little is positively known. In the Assyrian king list, the earliest king recorded was Tudia. He was a contemporary of Ibrahim of Ebla, who appears to have lived in the late 25th or early 24th century BC, according to the king list. The foundation of the first true urbanized Assyrian monarchy was traditionally ascribed to Ashpur, a contemporary of Ishbi-Erra of Ising and Naplanum of Lhasa, c. 2030 BC. Assyria had a period of empire from the 19th to 18th centuries BC. From the 14th to 11th centuries BC, Assyria once more became a major power with the rise of the Middle Assyrian Empire. Iron Age. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was the dominant political force in the ancient Near East during the Iron Age, eclipsing Babylonia, Egypt, Urartu and Elam. During this period, Aramaic was also made an official language of the empire, alongside the Akkadian language. The Neo-Babylonian Empire marks the final period of the history of the ancient Near East preceding Persian conquest. A year after the death of the last strong Assyrian ruler, Ashurbanipal, in 627 BC, the Assyrian Empire spiraled into a series of brutal civil wars. Babylonia rebelled under Nabopolassar, a member of the Chaldean tribe which had migrated from the Levant to southeastern Babylonia in the early 9th century BC. In alliance with the Medes, Persians, Scythians and Cimmerians, they sacked the city of Nineveh in 612 BC. And the seat of empire was transferred to Babylonia for the first time since the death of Hammurabi in the mid-18th century BC. This period witnessed a general improvement in economic life and agricultural production, and a great flourishing of architectural projects, the arts and science. The Neo-Babylonian period ended with the reign of Nabonidus in 539 BC. To the east, the Persians had been growing in strength, and eventually Cyrus the Great established his dominion over Babylon. Classical antiquity. Achaemenid and Seleucid rule. Mesopotamia was conquered by the Achaemenid Persians under Cyrus the Great in 539 BC, and remained under Persian rule for 2 centuries. The Persian Empire fell to Alexander of Macedon in 331 BC and came under Greek rule as part of the Seleucid Empire. Babylon declined after the founding of Seleucia on the Tigris, the new Seleucid Empire capital. The Seleucid Empire at the height of its power stretched from the Aegean in the west to India in the east. It was a major center of Hellenistic culture that maintained the preeminence of Greek customs where a Greek political elite dominated, mostly in the urban areas. The Greek population of the cities who formed the dominant elite were reinforced by immigration from Greece. Much of the eastern part of the empire was conquered by the Parthians under Mithridates I of Parthia in the mid-2nd century BC. Parthian and Roman rule at the beginning of the 2nd century AD, the Romans, led by Emperor Trajan, invaded Parthia and conquered Mesopotamia, making it an imperial province. It was returned to the Parthians shortly after by Trajan's successor, Hadrian. Christianity reached Mesopotamia in the 1st century AD, and Roman Syria in particular became the center of Eastern Rite Christianity and the Syriac literary tradition. Sumerian Akkadian religious tradition disappeared during this period, as did the last remnants of cuneiform literacy, although temples were still being dedicated to the Assyrian national god Ashur in his home city as late as the 4th century. Sassanid Empire in the 3rd century AD, the Parthians were in turn succeeded by the Sassanid dynasty, which ruled Mesopotamia until the 7th century Islamic invasion. The Sassanids conquered the independent Neo-Assyrian states of Adiabene, Osran, Hatra and finally Ashur during the 3rd century. In the mid-6th century the Persian Empire under the Sassanid dynasty was divided by Khosrau into 4 quarters, of which the western one, called Kavavaran, included most of modern Iraq, and subdivided to provinces of Mishan, Ashuristan, Adiabene and Lower Media. The term Iraq is widely used in the medieval Arabic sources for the area in the center and south of the modern republic as a geographic rather than a political term, implying no greater precision of boundaries than the term Mesopotamia, or, indeed, many of the names of modern states before the 20th century. There was a substantial influx of Arabs in the Sassanid period. Upper Mesopotamia came to be known as Al-Jazira in Arabic, and Lower Mesopotamia came to be known as Iraq-i-Arab, meaning the escarpment of the Arabs, abolished the Lakhmid kingdom and laid the frontier open to nomad incursions. Farther north, the western quarter was bounded by the Byzantine Empire. The frontier more or less followed the modern Syria-Iraq border and continued northward, passing between Nisibis as the Sasanian frontier fortress and Dara and Amida held by the Byzantines. Middle Ages. Muslim conquest. The first organized conflict between local Arab tribes and Persian forces seems to have been in 634, when the Arabs were defeated at the Battle of the Bridge. There was a force of some 5,000 Muslims under Abu Bakr Ubayd Thaqafi, which was routed by the Persians. This was followed by Khalid ibn al-Walid's successful campaign which saw all of Iraq come under Arab rule within a year, with the exception of the Persian Empire's capital, Ctesiphon. Around 636, a larger Arab Muslim force under Sabak ibn Abi Waqqas defeated the main Persian army at the Battle of al-Qadishir and moved on to capture the Persian capital of Ctesiphon. By the end of 638, the Muslims had conquered all of the western Sassanid provinces, and the last Sassanid emperor, Yazdijid III, had fled to central and then northern Persia, where he was killed in 651. The Islamic expansions constituted the largest of the Semitic expansions in history. These new arrivals did not disperse and settle throughout the country. Instead they established 2 new garrison cities, at Al-Kufa, near ancient Babylon, and at Basra in the south, while the north remained largely Assyrian and Christian in character. Abbasid Caliphate. Iraq thus became a province of the Muslim Caliphate. The city of Baghdad was built in the 8th century and became the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad soon became the primary cultural center of the Muslim world during the centuries of the Islamic Golden Age. Mongol invasion. The center of the Islamic Caliphate in the 12th century was still Baghdad, albeit weakened by internal divisions and external threats from the Buwayhids and Seljuks. The Caliphate was eventually destroyed by the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. By 1237 the Mongol Empire had subjugated most of Persia, Armenia, Georgia excluding Abbasid Iraq and Ismaili strongholds, and all of Afghanistan and Kashmir. When Caliph al-Musta'sim refused to submit to the Mongols, Baghdad was besieged and captured by the Mongols in 1258. With the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate, Hulagu had an open route to Syria and moved against the other Muslim powers in the region. Turco-Mongol rule Iraq now became a province on the southwestern fringes of the Ilkhanate, and Baghdad would never regain its former importance. The Jalayirids were a Mongol Jalayir dynasty which ruled over Iraq and western Persia after the breakup of the Ilkhanate in the 1330s. The Jalayirids Sultanate lasted about 50 years, until disrupted by Tamerlane's conquests and the revolts of the Black Sheep Turks, or Karakoy-Yunlu Turkmen. After Tamerlane's death in 1405, there was a brief attempt to re-establish the Sultanate in southern Iraq and Khuzestan. The Jalayirids were finally eliminated by Karakoy-Yunlu in 1432. Ottoman and Mamluk rule. During the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the Black Sheep Turkmen ruled the area now known as Iraq. In 1466, the White Sheep Turkmen defeated the Black Sheep and took control. In the 16th century, most of the territory of present-day Iraq came under the control of Ottoman Empire as the Pashalik of Baghdad. Throughout most of the period of Ottoman rule, the territory of present-day Iraq was a battle zone between the rival regional empires and tribal alliances. Iraq was divided into three vilayets: Mosul Province, Baghdad Province, Basra Province. The Safavid dynasty of Iran briefly asserted their hegemony over Iraq in the periods of 1508 to 1533 and 1622 to 1638. During the years 1747 to 1831, Iraq was ruled by the Mamluk officers of Georgian origin who succeeded in obtaining autonomy from the Ottoman Empire, suppressed tribal revolts, curbed the power of the Janissaries, restored order and introduced a program of modernization of economy and military. In 1831, the Ottomans managed to overthrow the Mamluk regime and again imposed their direct control over Iraq.